You have been mourning something that is still alive. That is the thing underneath all of it. Not the grief of something that ended. Not the grief of something that was taken. The particular and disorienting grief of something that exists, fully, in the field between you and that you cannot yet touch. Something that is not gone, that has never been gone. That is, in fact, closer to the surface than it has been at any point in this journey. And yet, the distance between where you are and where the two of you are supposed to land has been sitting in your chest like a weight that belongs to loss, like something you are allowed to mourn, even though the thing you are mourning has not died. That grief has a name. Psychologists call it anticipatory grief, the mourning of a future state, the mourning of something that has not yet arrived as if it might not arrive at all. And what makes anticipatory grief so specific and so difficult to metabolize is that it lives inside an impossible container. You cannot grieve it fully because it has not ended. You cannot release it because it is not gone. You can only carry the weight of a future that feels uncertain while simultaneously holding the knowing, the deep structural knowing that arrives below the level of thought, that the thing you are carrying the weight for is real. You have been doing both of those things at once for longer than you can probably accurately measure. And what this video is going to do is name why that specific experience, the mourning of what is still alive, is not evidence that the journey is failing. It is evidence that you are exactly inside the phase that this journey is built to move through. And understanding what this phase is actually for changes what you do with the weight you have been carrying. If you have felt the grief of something that is not gone, if you have been mourning a future that still exists and still calls to you even when you cannot see the path to it, leave a like and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Drop the words "I am mourning what is still mine" in the comments. Because that grief is one of the most misread experiences on this journey, and what it is actually telling you is not what you think it is. Before we go any further, there is something I need to put directly in front of you. You have been carrying something the internet cannot reach, not because the content is wrong, because it was never written for your chart, it was written for a crowd, and you are not a crowd. You are one specific soul with one specific birth moment, tied to one specific person through a contract that was encoded in the stars before you ever found each other. What the universe is currently orchestrating between you, what phase you are actually in, what is blocking the movement your soul has already committed to. None of that lives in a general framework. It lives in your chart. A twin flame union personal reading goes there. A personal audio reading and a full written report built from your name, your date of birth, your exact time of birth, your place of birth. Delivered to your inbox within 48 hours. Not guidance written for everyone. The precise map of your connection, pulled from the stars that were present the moment you arrived. The link is in the description below. There is a specific experience that this journey produces, and it does not have a widely recognized name. But you know what it feels like from the inside. You wake up one morning and there is a stillness in you that you did not have the night before. Not peace exactly. Something quieter than peace and heavier than it too. The kind of settling that has nothing to do with resolution because nothing has resolved. He has not returned. The silence has not broken. The circumstances between you have not rearranged themselves overnight into something new. Nothing external has changed. But something internal has, and you do not know what to do with a change that happened inside you while the world around you held exactly still. This is the morning after a seismic event that no one else saw. Today the sky is holding a full moon at 11 degrees 20 minutes of Scorpio, exact at 5:22 in the evening Greenwich Mean Time. The sun sits directly opposite at 11 degrees 20 minutes of Taurus. This is not a soft lunation. Scorpio does not operate at the surface. Scorpio excavates. It insists on depth over convenience, on truth over the comfortable story, on what is actually present in the field rather than what the mind has agreed to manage down into something livable. And a full moon in Scorpio, illuminated by a Taurus sun, creates the specific tension between what is yours and what is shared. between what you have built to feel stable and what transformation is asking you to release. The seismic events on this journey are rarely the visible ones. They are rarely the conversation or the silence or the withdrawal or the moment of contact. Those are the surface events, the ones that register as episodes in the story you are living. The actual seismic events are the ones that happen in the interior, the ones that reorganize the architecture of your understanding without asking your permission, the ones you wake up already inside of, already past, already changed by, without quite being able to locate when the shift occurred. What makes this full moon particularly significant is what Pluto is doing. Pluto in Aquarius is squaring both the Sun and the Moon today. That square is a pressure point. Pluto rules Scorpio, which means this full moon is operating in Pluto's energy twice over, and then Pluto itself is bearing down on the lunation from Aquarius. What surfaces under this configuration is not surface material. It is the deep layer, the layer that has been building without your awareness, organizing itself in the interior space where the actual transformation always happens first. Psychologists who study personal transformation have identified what they call quantum change, a term developed by researchers William Miller and Janet DeBacca after years of studying the accounts of people who described fundamental shifts in their identity and their perception of what was real. Not gradual change, not incremental, improvement over time. Sudden, complete, and permanent reorganization of the interior. A before and an after with a seismic line between them that the person can feel but often cannot explain. What Miller and his colleagues found was that quantum change events share certain consistent features. They arrive without warning. They are not produced by the decision to change. They simply arrive. Something in the interior rearranges, and the person who wakes up after the seismic event is recognizably the same person who went to sleep before it, but is also, in some specific and permanent way, not the same. The twin flame journey is structured around these events, not around visible milestones. Around the invisible seismic events that are rewriting your interior while the visible story appears to hold still. You have had more of these than you know. The ones that did not announce themselves. The ones that left you waking into a different quality of stillness than the one you carried the day before. They are the mechanism. And one is moving through you right now, under this Scorpio full moon, in the particular pressure of Pluto squaring both lights. Something that has been building in the latent space of your interior is crossing a threshold today. Not loudly, not with ceremony, with the specific quiet of the thing that reorganizes everything without asking permission. Here is where psychology offers something that the twin flame community's language reaches toward but rarely names precisely. There is a body of research built around what scientists call latent variable change, the study of processes of transformation that are happening continuously but are not detectable at the surface level until they cross a threshold and become visible all at once. It is most extensively documented in developmental psychology, in the study of how children acquire language and how adults move through stages of identity formation, but its principles appear in every field that studies complex systems moving through time. The basic finding is this: most meaningful change does not accumulate visibly. It accumulates beneath the observable surface in what researchers call the latent space, the interior of the system, the part that is not yet producing different behavior or different outputs, but is reorganizing the structure that behavior eventually emerges from. The system looks the same on the outside. The measurements look the same. The behavior is indistinguishable from what it has been. And then, sometimes suddenly and always without warning from the outside, the latent reorganization crosses a threshold and everything visible changes at once. Language acquisition in children works this way. A child appears not to be learning language for months. They are not producing words, they are not visibly improving. And then, in a period of weeks that can feel to parents like an explosion, the child begins speaking in complex sentences. The explosion is not where the language learning happened. The explosion is where the latent accumulation crossed the threshold into the visible. The learning happened in the months of apparent stillness. Carol Dweck, whose research on what she called the growth mindset has become foundational in educational and organizational psychology, made a closely related discovery when she began tracking not just students' performance, but students' beliefs about the nature of their own capacity. What she found was that people who understood their abilities as fixed, as a set quantity that they either had or did not have, interpreted difficulty as evidence of the limit of their capacity. People who understood their abilities as dynamic interpreted difficulty as evidence that they were working at the exact edge of current capacity, which is precisely where development happens. Dweck's language for what she discovered in fixed mindset thinkers is precise and relevant to you. The mind that does not understand latent change looks at a period of apparent stillness and reads it as evidence of a ceiling, as proof that this is as far as things go. That the lack of visible progress means the progress has stopped. That is the interpretation the grief has been offering you, that the distance is the limit, that the silence is the evidence of the ceiling. It is not the evidence of the ceiling. It is the latent phase. The reorganization is happening below the level that produces visible change in both of you, simultaneously in ways that will not be legible until the threshold is crossed. And the Scorpio full moon today, with Pluto pressing down from Aquarius, is one of those threshold moments. Not the final one, a threshold. One of the points where the latent accumulation pushes closer to the surface than it has been in months. Now, something needs to be said that is not said often enough in this conversation, and it is this. His silence is not the absence of process. Mars is in Pisces today, moving through the last degrees of that sign before it changes. Mars in Pisces does not fight outwardly. It turns inward. It drives movement through the interior rather than through visible action. And Jupiter is still in Gemini, gathering information, processing the multiplicity of what has been felt and thought and known and avoided. The sky today is not configured for visible masculine movement. It is configured for internal reckoning. Erik Erikson, whose theory of psychosocial development mapped the stages of growth that humans move through across the entire lifespan, identified a tension that he placed at the center of midlife psychological development. The tension between what he called generativity and stagnation. Generativity is the capacity to contribute to something beyond the self. To build something, create something, understand one's own life as embedded in a larger story. Stagnation is its opposite. The feeling of being trapped in the concerns of the small self, unable to connect to anything larger, caught in cycles that produce a specific and grinding form of misery. Erikson's insight was not that generativity is produced by external circumstances. It is produced by internal reckoning. The person who arrives at generativity does so through a confrontation with the self that is often experienced as crisis, as a fundamental questioning of who they are, what they have built, whether the life they have been living is the life their soul came here to live. The divine masculine in late separation is inside that confrontation, not consciously in most cases. He is not sitting somewhere reviewing the theory of psychosocial development and applying it to his emotional state. He is experiencing it as a restlessness he cannot name, a dissatisfaction with the life he has been living that has no obvious source, a sense that something is missing that goes deeper than anything external could fix, a pull towards something enormous that he has not yet found the courage or the language to orient himself toward. Saturn is in Aries right now, approaching its exact conjunction with Neptune. Saturn in Aries presses on the identity. It asks the hardest question a person can be asked, which is, who are you when you strip away everything you have used to manage the distance between yourself and the truth of what you want? That question does not feel philosophical when Saturn is asking it. It feels like pressure with no obvious release valve. It feels like the walls getting closer without any visible cause. He is quiet from your perspective. From his own interior, he is in one of the noisiest periods of his life. The noise is just happening in a register you cannot hear from outside. Back to the grief. Because the grief needs to be held and understood rather than quickly transformed into something more comfortable. You are mourning something that is still alive. And there is a more precise thing to say about what that mourning is actually teaching you, underneath the experience of it. Grief, as a psychological process, is not primarily about loss. This is the thing that Elisabeth Kubler-Ross was working toward at the end of her life, and that more recent grief researchers like Robert Niemeyer have continued to document. Grief is primarily about reorganization. What grief does at its biological and psychological core is force the mind to revise its model of the world. When something changes, when a future that was assumed can no longer be assumed in the same shape, the mind has to rebuild the map that organized around the old reality. That rebuilding is painful because the old map was not just information. It was the structure inside which the self lived. Your grief is doing that. It is forcing your mind to revise the map that has been organizing around one particular version of how the story resolves, one particular timeline, one particular sequence of events leading to one particular kind of arrival. And the revision is not because that resolution is not coming. It is because the map that has been holding it was too narrow, too specific, too organized around the version of the story that you could imagine from where you stood early in the journey. The grief is making room for a larger map. The Scorpio full moon today is amplifying this. Scorpio is the sign of transformation through the death and rebirth cycle, of releasing what has expired so that what is real can surface. The moon full in Scorpio is not asking you to perform release. It is creating the conditions under which release happens whether you intend it or not. What has reached the end of its form in you is reaching that end tonight, not your love, not the connection, the version of the container that has been holding them. Niemeyer, whose work on meaning reconstruction has become one of the most clinically applicable frameworks for understanding transformative loss, found that the people who moved through grief most fully were not the ones who found a way to accept loss without fully feeling it. They were the ones who were willing to let the grief dismantle the old story completely, to sit inside the dismantled space long enough that a truer story could assemble itself. You have been doing that, sitting inside the dismantled space. And while you have been sitting inside it, the truer story has been assembling itself beneath the surface of your awareness. In the latent space, in the interior where the seismic events happen without witnesses, here is where the understanding needs to be handled carefully, because something needs to be said about what tracking your own progress actually requires. Most people on this journey have no external record of their own interior movement. The seismic events happen without witnesses. The latent change accumulates without documentation. The grief of becoming moves through you and leaves without a trace that you can return to. And because there is no record, the mind has no way to compare where you are now to where you were 6 weeks ago, 3 months ago at the beginning. The comparison would be astonishing if you could make it. This is the gap the Twin Flame Journey Tracker and Progress Workbook closes, not another guide, not another framework. A 39-page structured system with an 8-stage journey tracker that maps your actual movement across months, so that you can look back and see in your own handwriting that you are not spinning. A synchronicity log that captures what the mind lets dissolve into the blur of weeks. A weekly reflection system that surfaces the patterns you cannot see from inside the current moment. Monthly reviews that turn the feeling of stagnation into a visible sequence of real movement. If you have been inside this journey without a way to see your own progress, the link is below. If you have been on this journey for more than 6 months, you have already been asked, probably many times, by people who do not understand what this is, whether you are progressing, whether things are getting better, whether you are moving on. And the honest answer, the one this framework gives, is that the question is built on the wrong model. It assumes that progress in this journey looks like something visible, something that can be assessed by someone standing outside of it. That is not how this works. James Hollis, a Jungian analyst whose work on personal transformation spans decades of clinical practice, describes what he calls the invisible curriculum of the soul. The idea that the most essential growth a person moves through is always organized, not by external circumstance, but by the requirements of their own deepest development. The soul, in Hollis's framework, is not a passive entity that responds to what life brings. It is an active organizing intelligence that selects from the available experiences of a life exactly the situations that its specific development requires. You did not stumble into this connection. Your soul selected it. From everything available in the field of your life, your soul moved toward this particular person because this particular connection carries the precise curriculum your specific development requires. Not a curriculum designed to be comfortable, a curriculum designed to be formative. Venus is in Taurus today, the sign she rules, approaching the opposition with the Scorpio moon. Venus in Taurus is the planet of love and value in the sign of what is real. What is built, what endures. When Venus in Taurus opposes the Scorpio moon, the question it asks is profound and specific. What is actually being built here beneath all of the uncertainty and the silence and the distance? Not what you hope is being built. What is structurally present that endures when everything temporary has been stripped away? The answer, when you look at this connection clearly, is not nothing. What endures is the recognition. What endures is the specific quality of what moves in both of you in response to the other. What endures is the soul contract, which is not a sentiment. It is a structural fact. And Venus in Taurus, opposing the Scorpio moon today, is making that structural fact more visible than the noise of the separation has allowed it to be in months. He has his own invisible curriculum. His soul selected this connection for reasons that are symmetrical to yours in structure but entirely his own in content. He is not working through your lessons, he is working through his. And the invisible architecture currently being built on both sides of the distance is being built toward each other. The geometry of this requires it. There is a specific experience that people report in the period just before latent change crosses the threshold into the visible. Researchers who study transformation across domains have noted it with enough consistency that it deserves to be named clearly. The experience just before the threshold is often the most difficult period of the process. Not the beginning, which is shocking and acute. Not the long middle, which is its own particular difficulty. The period just before the threshold. The period when the latent reorganization is complete enough to be generating enormous internal pressure, but has not yet crossed into the visible space where it can express itself, and where the pressure can be released. William Miller described this period as ambivalence at maximum intensity. The point at which both the pull toward change and the resistance to it are operating at their highest simultaneous activation. Not because the person is confused or uncommitted. Because the transformation is so close and so large that the system is experiencing its gravity fully for the first time. That is the weight you have been carrying. The Pluto square to this full moon is doing exactly this work today. Pluto does not allow things to stay in the comfortable middle. It presses. It excavates. It makes suppression unavailable in a specific and temporary window. And what rises to the surface under Pluto's pressure is not always beautiful in the moment of its rising. It is real, and real is what is required at this stage. The weight is not evidence of stagnation, it is evidence of proximity. The thing that generates this specific gravity is close enough that you are feeling it in your body, in your chest, and the specific quality of the grief that does not quite feel like grief for something gone. But they are not the same. What you are in now has a quality of building pressure, of something gathering, of the specific sensation of being at the end of something rather than inside the middle of it. That sensation is not a feeling to be suspicious of. It is an accurate read of where you are. There is one last thing that needs to be said, and it is the most important thing. The weight you have been carrying is not a burden that arrived to exhaust you. It is structural. It is the weight of something you are building while you carry it. Think of the way a body builds muscle, not through comfort, through resistance precisely calibrated to the current capacity of the body. The resistance that feels like too much is the resistance that produces growth when the body is close enough to the edge of its current capacity to be genuinely challenged. The weight that feels impossible to carry for one more day is, very often, the weight that was always the exact right weight for the specific growth that is required. Viktor Frankl, whose experience of the most extreme human suffering and whose subsequent development of logotherapy. The idea that meaning is the most fundamental human motivation and the most reliable source of resilience, wrote about this with a precision that belongs to this moment. He found that the people who survived, not just physically but psychologically intact, were the ones who found a way to understand their suffering as having a structure, a purpose, a direction, not in a way that denied the reality of the suffering, in a way that embedded the suffering inside something larger than itself, something that the suffering was contributing to rather than merely an obstacle to. The Saturn and Neptune conjunction building in Aries right now is the architecture of exactly this. Saturn demands reality. Neptune dissolves the false structures. Together, in Aries, they are dismantling whatever in both of you has been organized around fear rather than around truth, around the managed version of the self rather than the actual one. That is not comfortable work. It is the most important work either of you will do this year. You are in the final stretch of the invisible work. The weight is different than it was. Not lighter necessarily, but different in quality. The weight of early separation had a disoriented quality, the weight of something that did not yet have a shape. The weight you are carrying now has a specific gravity to it, the gravity of something that has a shape and a direction and a structural purpose, even if you cannot yet see the shape clearly from inside the carrying of it. The full moon in Scorpio tonight is not a coincidence for you. Scorpio is the sign that knows how to hold what is buried without flinching, that knows how to stay in the depth long enough for the transformation to complete itself, that does not reach for the surface before the work below is finished. You have been living inside scorpionic depth for the duration of this journey. Tonight the sky is in your sign. Tonight the sky is holding what you have been holding. You are not at the end of the road. You are at edge of the current container, and the expansion is already underway. You have been mourning something that is still alive. It is still alive. It is growing. And so are you.